podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm Mark Crossfield, your host of this new series, where we introduce you to experts, coaches, and thought leaders who share their passion for career coaching. Our aim is to provide a comprehensive and informative resource for career coaches at all stages of their careers, offering valuable insights and practical advice from experienced professionals in the industry. Each week, I meet with a coaching expert and we explore an important aspect of career coaching. Hello and welcome to another episode exploring the world of career coaching. In today's conversation, my guest is Julia Menaul, and we're talking about ethics in career coaching. Julia's list of coaching and professional qualifications are extensive. Accredited Master Executive Coach with the Association for Coaching, 2 coach supervision qualifications, membership of the Association of Coaching Supervisors, and also the British Psychological Society. In addition to her impressive qualifications, Julia is a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, a Fellow of the Institute of Training and Occupational Learning, and a board member for the Association of Coaching Supervisors. There is nobody better to talk with about ethics. As a coach supervisor, Julia gets to deal with lots of ethical issues around coaching. So, let's meet Julia Menaul. Julia, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well, because we're discussing ethics in career coaching today. Mm-hmm. And as a master executive coach and coach supervisor, you must have a firm grasp on the ethical landscape when it comes to coaching. So to start us off, can you explain what we mean by ethics in coaching and why it's important for coaches to have an ethical framework?
Yeah, well, that is a big question. And how much time do we have? Because that's the thing about ethics. There's no cut and dried answer with it. And it's a strange old word that's actually not very sexy at all. So I know when I've done ethics sessions, you have less people turning up if you mention the E word than if you turn it into something that looks like it's a bit more interesting. I think ethics sounds very dry and dusty, but it isn't once you get into it. So really, it's an invisible framework that most of us live and work by, and we don't even know we've got an ethical framework. So it's having that ability to reflect, rationalise, notice our emotional capacity to decide when something is right or wrong. And then sometimes it's having the courage to do something with something that we think might be right or wrong. The problem is there isn't really a black and white right or wrong. There can be lots of grey areas in between. So even if we agree that something is within our society very wrong, you may still get other things that other people would think, well, I don't have a problem with that. So it's not a set of rules. That's unfortunately the problem with ethics. It's actually rooted in people's culture and their family influences and their background. So both you and I, Mark, may have completely different ethical framework that we operate on a personal level, but we might be able to decide that actually we're closer together when we come to look at coaching, for instance, and we've got things that guide us with coaching, like the global ethical code that we're both familiar with in the AC. So yeah, it's about values, it's about beliefs, all those things that also add into some of the rules and procedures that other people have put in place for us in the profession.
Yeah. So you mentioned there the global code of ethics. So just for those that are not aware of that, that's the code which has got I think it's about 10 signatories, including the AC, EMCC, and the Mentoring Institute all signed up to that. So we have got a framework, but I think you're right. It's about personalizing the ethics and relating it to your own practice. And we're going to talk about how we do that in terms of career coaching today in particular. And especially because coaching is an unregulated industry, isn't it? So we do need some way of behaving in the right way, don't we?
We certainly do. Yeah. And we're challenged every day. And the problem with ethics is you almost can't exercise that muscle until something happens that enables you to go, oh, this doesn't feel right. And often that's what people think. It's an intuitive thing, as well as looking at the code, because the code has a lot of interpretation in it as well. We use words like write reasonable notes. Well, what does reasonable mean? Yeah, so actually the code looks like a dry and dusty document, but actually it's very rich when you get into it and you start to look at it and think, how does my practice measure up against that?
Yeah. Well, let's bring it to life for career coaches then. So what do you think are some of the unique challenges that career coaches face when it comes to ethics compared to other areas of coaching, for example?
Well, many of them are the same, of course, similar dilemmas that any coach would have. I think for career coaches, there's often multiple stakeholders, depending on what your contract is, of course. If you're doing career coaching and the organisation is fully involved with that, you'll probably have more stakeholders there than if, for instance, you've got a client who's paying for your services directly. So straight away, there's something there for you to pay attention to about, whose contract is this? Who gets to have the biggest say about what happens in this contract? And an obvious career coaching dilemma, I think most career coaches will recognise, is when you feel like the company is helping you to move somebody on, perhaps without their knowledge. Sometimes it is their knowledge and they're talking about career development or promotion, but I think many of us have been in that situation where we get the feeling that the company is paying for coaching when really they wouldn't be too unhappy if the person left. So that's probably the number one dilemma, I would say. But you can get all sorts of things. I had one recently where a coach was working in two different organisations, and he was working with one person to get a new job somewhere else, and that was the organisation was paying. It was part of some outplacement work, and unfortunately, the coach found himself in an ethical dilemma because the coach he was working with then got a job in the organisation where he was working elsewhere, which would have been perhaps the end of the world. But unfortunately, that coach, he got a job in the same team and was one of the peers of the person. And so the coach is like, do I tell them? This is now changed the frame of reference here. And in that situation, the coach realised he hadn't asked enough questions about the coach's job applications at the time, because maybe you think, do I need to know what organisations are applying for? But that was a scenario where it actually came back to revisit him later, that it would have been useful because he could have, stopped that in its tracks.
Yeah. And I suppose that there are those situations where you get blindsided. That is probably one example of that, isn't it? That there are things happen which are very difficult to predict. And well, let's dive a bit more into this. So, I want to keep things relatively simple. So let's think about ethical considerations a career coach should address before, during, and after a coaching session, so to provide some sort of structure for the listeners. So when it comes to before, there are three areas I'm particularly interested in, beyond, say, being professionally competent. And that's in marketing your services, number one, having ethical discovery calls or chemistry calls, and contracting ethically. And you've mentioned contracting briefly there as well. If we can talk about ethical marketing first, where do you think career coaches can go wrong here?
I think it can be the same as for other coaches, in the fact that in the code it says conflict of interest. And again, that could mean anything. But sometimes that's, we know how networking works, and sometimes we can be given names or contacts or leads in one organisation. How explicit is it about whether we can actually use that information? So we may find something out working with an organisation or with a person that would perhaps give us an advantage elsewhere to go and market our services elsewhere or to tap that person for some work. So I think we have to be really careful with that. And that's quite hard because where's the boundary with, relevant networking? And it's the usual stuff about naming names without permission. You get a testimonial from a client and they loved the work that you did. You might want to put that on your website, but you've got to be really careful that they're giving permission and they're actually giving permission for their name and for their organisation. So I've had scenarios where the person's okay with their name, but they don't want me to put the organisation on there because, the organisation, there were security issues with that. So, those are things that are really good for your marketing, but not necessarily good for the other person. I think also, as well, as we know, it's a small world sometimes, and that clients will move to other companies. And then do you refer to the old one, that they perhaps worked with, or the new one, and implications for that as well? You can easily get caught out talking to other people, marketing yourself about your opportunities and mention an organisation to help get some business. And then unfortunately, you might discover that the person sitting opposite you, their wife works in that business, or there's some other grey line that's been crossed accidentally. Like you say, you can be blindsided. And all you're doing is trying to market yourself.
So it's tricky, isn't it? There are a few obstacles here, aren't there? And you mentioned about promoting your services in an honest and transparent way, making sure you obtain consent from clients for any recommendations, for example. What about those chemistry calls? Because, career coaching is a business for most people. And when we're meeting a potential client for the first time, we need to understand the client's needs, explain our career coaching services, and potentially make an offer to work together, don't we? So how can we behave in the right way and balance the commercial pressures to find clients with the need to behave ethically in those meetings?
I think you're more likely to bump into more problems at this stage. In chemistry sessions, we want to win the work. Sometimes that means we make the wrong decisions. We might hear something and a little bell might go off, which is our ethical bell, but we may choose not to hear it because we want the work. Things like confidentiality, for instance, you need to be clear when you're having a chemistry session that call itself is also confidential, that it starts from that point, and being clear with the client. If you've made any notes during that chemistry session, what's going to happen to those if you don't end up working together? Because obviously they've told you information, that's data. So, being clear about what your policy is there. And I think also, we all have that commercial pressure to say yes to things that might not necessarily be in our competencies or our skills in order to be helpful. And let's be honest, if we hear something that we think, oh, that would be a really, really juicy to get into, it's a sector I've always wanted to work in, it's a very, very difficult pull to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't think that's right. And I'm going to pass them on to somebody else, for instance.
Yeah, and this could particularly be challenging for new coaches, can't it? Because of that, particularly those operating commercially, because they're looking for business. They perhaps don't have a deeper understanding of ethics, and they've perhaps not realised that not every client is the right client for them, because that's important to understand, isn't it? And also, when setting expectations, it's very easy to set unrealistic expectations so that clients perhaps think they're going to make progress quicker than is realistic, because unfortunately we don't have a crystal ball with our work. We don't know how quickly our clients are going to move through the progression of move from one career to another. So it can be challenging, can't it?
Yeah, and I think also if the client's coming and they're paying out of their own pocket, there can be a real pull there to want to help them, and it might make you agree to things that you wouldn't ordinarily. By the same token, if a company's paying, then sometimes people will arrive with an amount of money to spend. Again, there could be a temptation to say yes to that. And I've seen scenarios where companies have gone, oh, we've got 12 sessions of coaching there. It's like, well, who's decided on how many is required? And it's like, then you're thinking, oh, okay, I've got 12 sessions with this person, and making it fit when actually ethically you haven't got into the work yet. You've only just had a chemistry session with them and you're not very close to establishing what the objectives are. Again, that's a moral and ethical issue there to say, should you be accepting that amount of money, that amount of work, when you actually haven't even established what it is yet?
Yeah, you're right. That's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I went through coach training, one thing we were always reminded of was ABC. Always be contracting. So I think contracting is important here, isn't it? And it's vital in upholding ethical standards. Maybe we can talk now about the importance of contracting in relation to this ethical discussion. What's your view on how we use the contract here?
Yeah, well, Mark, that contracting is everything. As a supervisor, coaches rarely come to supervision and go, Julia, I want to talk about my contracting. But invariably, when we start to unpack issues and dilemmas and problems, it usually comes back to the contracting. So, that's always a top tip. If you are stuck and you're struggling, just return to your contracting. Was there something that wasn't done there, or there was something that was done there at the time? So it's back to this, what are you saying yes or no to? That's the key thing. And can you provide what they're asking for, but perhaps you don't want to? So it could well be that you're thinking, yeah, I could do that, but there's this here, and paying attention to that. So an example would be that somebody explains, they want some career coaching, blah, 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 but what the area they want to work in isn't something you're comfortable with. So, or they want a promotion and they work for a company that you have some moral misgivings about. So, say, for instance, gambling is very much in the news at the moment. So, everybody would have, this is back to what is ethics, everybody would have their own, moral compass around whether they would want to actually work with a gambling company. Same with big pharma, for instance, or big food, any of those types of things, that we all have to work out what's acceptable for us. So that's that bit. But also, if you can't provide what they're looking for, you need to be clear about that in the contracting, that it might be about level of competence, your skill, or even just your capacity. You can't fit them in, and you're squeezing them in, and then that's not ethical, because then you are not providing the proper service to the client. If you just think, oh yeah, it's okay to do five sessions in a day, it'll be fine, I'll sneak in a sixth one. Is that really ethical? What is the reason that you're doing that? Is it because you are, watching your bank balance, or you're desperate to work with that particular company because they're a world leader, for instance? And I think also it's that contracting for, I can't provide this because actually what the coaching you want isn't coaching. So sometimes people will come to tell you about things like, I had one recently where she came and she wanted a promotion and she didn't feel like it's happening, and she was wanted some coaching to get to the next stage. But when we unpacked it, there were a lot of other things that were going on in the background, and she had a high level anxiety, which raised a real concern for me around her mental health. So I didn't want to contract with her, which meant I'm then colluding with, because that's some of the key things as a coach is if a client says they want X, what if it's doing harm to self or others? Or you can see that actually, I'm not sure that's going to be a really good strategy for you at this time in your life, given what else you've told me. So my example with this particular lady was that she went and had some therapy first. She was almost tackling the wrong thing at that time. Sorting out her anxiety probably would enable her to increase her confidence to get the next promotion. Anyway, so I think it's contracting around who's paying for this, and if the company is paying, What do they want out of it? How much involvement do they want? What's the situation? What are they paying for? And again, it depends on where the client is. Are they leaving the company? Are they staying in it? Is this a development promotion opportunity? What are their expectations? Not just the coachee, but also the organisations as well, because it's their money.
Yeah. And for private clients, and that can be a lot for career coaching clients, it's about really setting those expectations, boundaries, and accountability, isn't it? Because if you make that clear at the beginning of your work together, as you say, that makes a lot of the problems that you might encounter later on disappear, doesn't it? Because you've communicated clearly to the client what those expectations are.
Yeah. Because as we know, sometimes they expect us to have a magic wand, and we don't necessarily have a magic wand, and sometimes those high hopes are down to thinking that you're going to be able to make everything all right with their work, and not thinking about that actually they've got to do a lot of it rather than looking to you to sort of give answers or to mentor. I think you're right. It's about being clear what actually is career coaching.
Yeah. I also think it's pretty good practice to recontract as well as you go along, because particularly with career coaching, what the client wants at the beginning might be different after 3 or 4 sessions. So they might come to you wanting a new career, for example. You work through some sessions with them, and that might change actually. It might be, now I've decided I do want to stay in the organisation, but I want to go for a promotion within my organisation, for example. So always being contracting is that's why it's so important, isn't it? Because recontracting along the way means that you and the client fully understand the position and the direction of the work that you're doing together.
Yeah, definitely. And I've had that situation where somebody wants help going for a promotion, and then they get it. But then they're going into a new job, and they can see the challenges in a new job, and they want some help with the onboarding, particularly if you've gone for a bigger leap. And so therefore, you've obviously got to recontract in that scenario, but also be true to yourself. Actually, am I the right person now for this next step of the process? Does this client actually need something different from me? That shows real ethical maturity, I think, with coaches who can be really honest with themselves and go, do you know what, that might not be the best thing for this client. Now they may need somebody different than me. Now the client's in a different place.
Yeah. So it's about understanding your own competence, isn't it? And really having the best interests of the client at heart. That's the key here, isn't it?
Yeah. And we're very good at self-justifying. We can come up with all sorts of excuses and rationalizations about why we should be doing this, but sometimes we're kidding ourselves. So that's what's good about supervision. It's like just holding your feet to the fire a little bit in order to go, isn't that really the case? And being truthful and honest.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about supervision, but we'll come on to that later. And I wanted to take us into like the next phase, which is like, the actual career coaching started now. And in the first part of this, we're trying to understand our clients' goals and motivations and other needs, aren't we? So we're exploring really all about our clients, helping them to understand themselves better. But let's wonder, are there any ethical considerations that coaches should be aware of here when they're doing that first initial work with the client?
Yeah, I think it's picking up the vibe of what other people's values and beliefs are, aren't they? And what's important to them, and also thinking about what are your values and beliefs in that scenario too, because sometimes those can become dangerously close to bias. And then all sorts of isms creep in, where we might make assumptions about people. I think in those initial stages, it's very much about finding out, doing a lot of listening in those initial stages. And I think sometimes when you're more experienced, you can leap ahead a little bit too much, that you can get into I've heard this loads of times before from different people. And it's very easy then to slide into more of a mentoring capacity there with something. Not that that's always wrong, because that might be what's required. But I think we can think, oh yes, I've seen this before, so therefore this is the way I'm going to approach it with this client. And also, that's what I was saying before, is listening to them and listening to, and whether we need to challenge when what they're saying is at odds. So they're saying they want one thing, but you're hearing something else, particularly if you're hearing something about their personal background. So my feeling is coaches not ask enough biographical inquiry and look at the bigger picture for, particularly in career coaching, because you can just get focused on the fact that it's career coaching and you're just thinking about their career. But remember, it fits into their life, not the other way around. So it's thinking about what's going on in the rest of their life and challenging what they want. And that can be quite hard for some coaches. Well, I just give what the client wants because it's their agenda, isn't it? Well, that's for us to hold the mirror up as well. It could well be that we decide it definitely is what they want. However, if you are noticing a real mismatch between what they're saying and what they could cope with, or what they have capacity for, or where they're going in their life, then that's our opportunity to hold that mirror up as well. Yeah. And looking at the bigger picture is crucial. You've got somebody in their 40s, they may be just completely focused on the next promotion, the next rung of the career ladder. How often have they stood back and gone, right, okay, where do I see myself in 20 years? Have I ever thought about when will be the time when I retire? What will I want to have done by then? And thinking about it in the round, what will my spouse be doing? What will my children be doing? What will the rest of my family be doing? How old will they be? And thinking about health and all the things that can easily get in the way of career planning in that period of time. That's our job as well. Definitely our job.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do want to talk about your book later on, but I will just mention something here, actually, that in your book, which I've read, by the way, there is something in there there's a question that's asked about the difference between executive coaching and life coaching, and the response is nothing after the third session. I think that's the response.
Yeah.
So that's what you talk about here, isn't it? That actually we need to understand our clients very well and not just focus on the career aspects of our work. We need to see the bigger picture, don't we?
Yeah, we certainly do. Yeah. Well, work-life balance has always been a strange little phrase, isn't it? As if the two are equal, and they're not. I think you can get caught in a bit of a treadmill, particularly when you're mid-career, and not necessarily do that stepping back. And it's then for us to help facilitate conversations that they can have back at home to sort of say, is this really what you want? And the other thing that I find people don't do is think about the relative ages of other people and what they might be doing at that time. So we can forget that our children grow up. And so we might have some sort of plan and then think, well, they won't be there. They'll probably be away and have flown the nest. Helping people to see that in context as well. And sometimes some of the practical things, just, do you have a will? Have you done any financial planning? You'd be surprised how many clients haven't done that. But actually that is very, very crucial for career planning because it all dovetails together.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that's right. I want to just touch on beliefs again and values and motivations, because this is an area I think that can be tricky at times. A client is presented to you and they have their own beliefs and values and motivations about their career. And it's very easy to impose your own beliefs, values, and motivations on the client, isn't it? With the best interests of the client. And that's tricky, isn't it? And so I want to just explore that for a couple of minutes, because I think it's an important area that many career coaches don't actually address particularly well. Have you got any thoughts on how that can be handled well?
I think it's bringing things out into the light of day, isn't it? Anything that's inside, that's not made conscious, once it's out there, you can sort of name it, call it out, do whatever you want with it. So I always say to people, rather than squashing it down, just bring that out and actually even admit it to the client if you are aware of something that's going on for you. I had a coaching client a lady in her mid-30s, and she was thinking about where to go. She was quite senior at quite a fairly young age in the organisation. She was thinking about her next promotion. But on the other hand, she was also thinking about starting a family. But there was a mismatch between the timescales. And in my head, I know I'm thinking, come on, get on with having your family, because, I'm at the other end of that spectrum there. And I remember what it was like to be in my 30s and thinking about that. So for me, I had a good enough relationship with that person to say, that's what's going on for me, and I know it's my stuff. And it puts it out there straight away, and just like the energy dissipates from it, rather than holding it down and holding the tension. Is going, right, okay, I've put that out there now. Let's put it aside. Let's work with what would work for you, and thinking through, what the process would be in order to have 2 children before 40 and have a promotion as well at the same time. Is that actually possible? Of course, you've got to be aware of your own values and beliefs. And so that's something to do the work on for yourself. Most of the models around good ethical decision making, when you look at them, they've all got something in there that says examine your own personal values and beliefs. Because then when you have an ethical dilemma, it's often something that's knocking on the door of your own beliefs that's making you think, actually, I'm not sure this is the right thing to do, which will be very different to somebody else's. But if you're not aware of that, most of us not walking around with a big list of our values in our top pocket. It's not until they're bumped up against, we don't really notice them. And sometimes the client reminds us of a value that we didn't know we had. And, when we hear the opposing view from a client, we think to ourselves, gosh, I would never do that, or I don't think that's a good idea. And then we're aware then that we're in that space. Obviously, you have to choose some things that you don't share with the client, and it could be something that's, I don't know, something around religion, for instance, or politics, or something like that, where these are about people's opinions, but they may actually run all the way through their life and their decisions, maybe completely different to yours. And again, is it going to get in the way of the coaching? Will you be able to provide a good service to the client by keeping that to yourself?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's good. It's that self-awareness, isn't it? And understanding that. And I like what you said before, that whilst we help clients to think out loud about their own beliefs and motivations and values, and that helps them to formulate and strengthen those in a positive way, we don't sit in our hands if we think there's something that would be helpful for them. So if we can see something that would be useful for them, they'd expect us to actually contribute to the discussion, wouldn't they? And I think the risk is you end up just sitting on the sidelines, and it just becomes only helping the client to think through their own beliefs, values, and motivations. Whereas if you've got the experience and you've got an insight, it is always worth sharing that with the right intention, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. And then you are authentic. Coaching is whether it's career coaching and other coaching, it's still a relational thing. So, you're thinking, well, if I was sitting in front of somebody else, I wouldn't necessarily hold something to myself that may be actually of use to the person. It may be a piece of information that you have, a piece of knowledge that you have. I think we have to be much more flexible sometimes. And when you're a more experienced coach, I think you're more confident to do that. Certainly, yeah.
And I think this understanding of ethics is very much about an ongoing process, isn't it? So we do some coaching work, we reflect, reflection is really important, isn't it? And then we go back into our coaching with changed by the new view we've got on an ethical approach. So thinking beyond the career coaching work now, how can career coaches continue to educate themselves on ethical guidelines and stay up to date with changes in the field?
Reading is obviously a good one. There's some excellent books, more coming out all the time. I think there's a new one on the printing press at the moment that I've heard about. So ethics is coming more and more to the fore, but there are lots of books about ethics within coaching or ethics within, the helping professions. So that's useful. The AC actually has just done a major project around ethics. It's got a fantastic page all about ethics, and the resources on there are really, really second to none. And it gets updated all the time. There are case studies in there, and I think one of the crucial things about developing ethical maturity is that sometimes you can't make ethical dilemmas happen. Obviously, the longer you work as a coach, you'll start bumping up against them. And once you start to tune your bell, your radar into ethics, you'll find that suddenly start appearing more and more. And that's always slightly worrying, because you think, did they come up before and I didn't notice them? But that's part of your brain tuning into that. So until you have those scenarios, you don't know how you would deal with them. And experiential learning is the best thing, I think, for ethical development. Failing that, case studies are the second best. And as I say, that website's great. But going to group sessions, group supervision, where you talk to other coaches, and they will bring ethical dilemmas that you may not have imagined in a million years. And hearing how they tackled it, you can then ask yourself that question: gosh, what would I have done? Would I have done that in the same way? And thinking about how you would have made that decision, because making a decision is okay, but then you've got to live with it. So that's part of the process as well, is thinking, can I live with the decision that I've made? So supervision in a group is great for that, but obviously one-to-one supervision is good for bringing something that's a bit more sensitive, that you don't necessarily want to share amongst other people, because there might be a level of vulnerability to it, or highly confidential, for instance. So educating yourself, I think, is just reading books is okay, but until you're confronted with things happening in the real world or hearing from other people, that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on supervision. Mm-hmm. I have both one-to-one supervision and also group supervision, and they are different things, really, for me. They do provide different things, and when it comes to hearing about other people's ethical dilemmas, group coaching is great for that. So I totally agree with that, Julia.
Yeah. If you can afford both, then have both, because they're completely different things. And it's amazing how often you think. Even now, I've been a coach for 20 years and a supervisor for 15. And last year, I heard something that blew me away ethically, and I thought, wow. Not heard of that before, because there always is things like that going on in the outside world that beggars belief sometimes.
Yeah, because as a career coach, it can be quite isolating, because you're working generally one-on-one with people. Sometimes it can be group coaching as well, of course, but you're not working necessarily alongside other career coaches and sharing best practice, are you? So supervision and group supervision really gives you that chance to share best practice as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. I want to squeeze in a quick question, Julia, about the book you've recently published with Maggie Zhao. The book is Coaching and Supervision Through Bereavement. Congratulations on the book, by the way. I have a copy right behind me here on the shelf. I've read it and it's excellent. And I've got a question really about that. And is, what do career coaches need to know about endings? So your book does talk about this. So endings, particularly in relation to clients that are transitioning roles, companies, or careers.
Yeah. And just to say that even though books about bereavement is about loss in all its general forms, I've been doing webinars and events about loss of job, because obviously, that's probably the biggest loss most coaches and career coaches get involved with. Because people's loss of job, you may be involved in helping them to exit from a company, which is an ending, and going into another environment and helping them to apply for jobs. But I think endings are really useful for career coaches to think about. For all coaches, there's almost multiple levels to this. It's thinking about, how do I do endings with my clients? How do I ensure that I contract for the ending at the beginning? So that when we talk about how many sessions, am I acting ethically then by thinking about, right, okay, well, this person required 3 sessions or 4 sessions rather than what can I get away with? We're thinking about what would be suitable for that client. And recontracting, as you say, so that we're not being pulled into doing these great big long never-ending contracts where the client becomes dependent on us, and it becomes not coaching, it becomes something else, and the contract never gets looked at. I think in terms of endings, sometimes just what might be a little tweak when you've got clients who are stuck, perhaps in a role that they are struggling to get to grips with, they're perhaps new in the role and you're perhaps helping them with some onboarding. It's also useful to just check back with them what jobs they did before, and just, how did that last job end up? Why did they leave? What happened there? And go back a few jobs. And I think most coaches are familiar with lifelines, where you get the client to map out their lifeline. Great activity for everybody, I think, and particularly for career coaches, so that you can see personal and career fitting together and what that was like, and what happened for them at some of the bad stages in their career and their life, and some of the good stages. And are you noticing a repeating pattern? So sometimes you'll have somebody who'll go, oh, I'm well out of that place and I'm really glad I've got this job now, and that's all I want to focus on. And they don't want the coach revisiting that. But it could be that there are some nuggets in how that ended. So is there some unfinished business there, something that's unresolved? So I had a client, I think I referenced it in the book, I had a client who, his last job, he was made redundant. The job before, he left because he didn't like the manager. The job before that, there was some sort of cloud. And you could see there was a repeating pattern for him. And he didn't want to look at it. But in actual fact, there were some seeds of learning in that to acknowledge some of those things, but also go, okay, how can we take that now into the future so that you don't make the same mistake again? It's a bit like having marriage guidance counselling, isn't it? After you've split up with somebody, so you can learn not to do it again in your next relationship.
You're so right, Julia, there, because a lot of clients I speak to, they've got unfinished business with the previous company. They're a bit ragged. They're maybe even a bit damaged by what's happened. Not necessarily because they've been made redundant, although that can happen. Just that the departure has left them feeling a little bit depleted. Yeah. So going back and talking about that and actually dealing with that and making that a good ending, if you can, builds confidence for the next stage, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, a lot of people ended in jobs not in not a great way. Nobody said thank you, nobody said goodbye, didn't get a leaving party, all the things that we got used to. And there's a sense of no closure to something, as if something's slightly unfinished. So I think you're right. Just checking in, just to see if there's anything there. The other side of the coin, of course, is that sometimes your client may be going into a new role where the person who was in it before there was a poor ending. And so you will find that in organisations quite a bit. If the person before is left under a cloud, nobody wants to talk about them again. We don't talk about that person. And it happens if the person's died. And there could be a lot of trauma there in the system that nobody's acknowledging. And can you imagine taking over the role of the person who was there before? So sometimes that's worth finding out. Is this a new role? Are you stepping into something that somebody had before? Where did they go? And sometimes that person's become the boss. So that could be an issue in itself. It's asking a lot more questions around the bigger piece to try and find out, is it that your client is stepping into some restricted energy in the system? That's what's creating the stuckness for them.
Yeah, that's terrific. Really, really, that's really useful, Julia. We're coming to the end now, Julia, and I've got one more question. And that is, what is your best advice for career coaches to help them to deliver consistent results for their clients?
Ooh. I have to say, I think I've probably already answered that. I think it's about putting your career in the context of your coach's life, because they don't operate in in a vacuum. So, and I would say establish that bigger picture fairly early on. Yeah. So that you're not sort of 3, 4, 5 sessions in and then suddenly find out that your client's got, a disabled spouse at home or some other issues that may actually work against what your objectives are and what you're planning to do. So, get that information fairly early on. And most clients will appreciate that, stepping back from the day-to-day treadmill that they might be on and thinking about the promotion and everything. It's stepping back and going, actually, does this fit? Does this fit in with everything else that's going on?
Yeah, that's great advice, actually. And it's been really good talking to you today, Julia. I feel like we've had a masterclass in coaching ethics.
I think so.
So thank you very much. Where can listeners find you and connect with you?
Yeah, obviously I'm on LinkedIn under Julia Menaul, Menaul. I've got a website, sparkcoachingandtraining.co.uk. I'm on Twitter and Facebook as well under my name. So, and I think there's only one Julia Menaul in the world. So if you Googled me, you would find me.
Oh, well done. And where can they learn more about your book, Coaching and Supervision Through Bereavement?
Well, that's on the website as well, but you can purchase it directly from Routledge, the publishers. If you want a nice little discount, then email me and I might be able to sign one for you and do a deal.
A special deal. Oh, thank you, Julia. That's tremendous. So to wrap up and in summary, it's important for coaches to have an ethical framework and to stay up to date with their knowledge on ethics. We've discussed the unique challenges faced by career coaches and some of the ethical considerations in the different stages of working with a client, as well as the benefits of coaching supervision in staying accountable and developing professionally. Finally, we provided some resource recommendations to help coaches to deepen their understanding of this important subject. Julia Menaul, once again, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us today.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest podcast episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insight from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.